it up, swashbucklers! You're listening to Under the Crossbones, episode number 105. My name is Phil Johnson. I'm your host for the show. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for telling your friends. All that good stuff that you do to support the show is awesome and helps me keep the old barge afloating on down the river. And here we are, episode number 105. And the fun fact about 105, the number 105, 105 years ago this year is when the Titanic went down. So I guess that's a fact. That's not a fun fact, because I don't think it was a fun situation. But nevertheless, 'tis a fact. And another fun fact, Celine Dion will be singing that song from the movie Titanic for the next 105 years. It's her free bird. She's never getting away from it. So we can all feel bad for Celine Dion and all her money. My guest on the show today is David Magee, and David Magee is a screenwriter of Finding Neverland, which is why we have him on the show today. Finding Neverland, of course, the movie with Johnny Depp and Kate Winslet. See, there's our Titanic connection right there. I didn't even think of it till now. Johnny Depp and Kate Winslet about J.M. Barrie and his creation of the Peter Pan story, which, of course, includes Captain Hook, my favorite pirate. I don't know if he's yours or not, but he's my favorite pirate. If you were to come into my office right now, you would see at least a half dozen, nope, more, a lot more, at least a dozen Captain Hook items around the room, from a signed picture, a picture from the Peter Pan animated film, signed by Margaret Carey, who was the model for Tinkerbell. I have at least 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 Captain Hook dolls of various vintages. I have a small Captain Hook figurine, and so there's a lot of Captain Hook in my office here. And I've always been a Captain Hook fan. I've always been drawn to the Peter Pan story in all its various incarnations. And so I was very excited to talk to David Magee to see how he approached J.M. Barrie. We talk about J.M. Barrie. We talk about researching J.M. Barrie and how to get to what may or may not have been the truth of all the things happening in that guy's life. So it's a really interesting discussion about that, about Captain Hook as a character and how he played into the story, and even a little bit about Dustin Hoffman, who is in Finding Neverland, but also played Captain Hook in the film Hook, which I now have realized I have a reason to have Dustin Hoffman on this show. So that's on the wish list for sure. Yeah. And he's also, David Magee, he's also the screenwriter of Life of Pi and the upcoming Mary Poppins movie and Narnia movies. So lots of good stuff. We dig into Life of Pi too, because that is a great, great film. And it was a very interesting challenge for him as a screenwriter to write it. So we're going to talk about all sorts of good stuff. I'm recording this on Monday this week, so we did some eclipse viewing this morning. Yeah, did you do it? Did you go out and watch the sun disappear? Kind of, a little bit. It really depends on which part of the country you're in. If you were up in Oregon, you got the full shebang, and if you were in Maine, you got like next to nothing. So. But, yeah, we went over to one of the local universities that was doing like a little talk, and they had glasses, special glasses, and all this kind of stuff. And then we sat outside and watched the sun mostly get covered up for 15 minutes. And then we turned around and went home. So it was one of those things where you go, that sounds cool, man. We're going to do that. It seems like if it were something that happened on a Saturday night, the parties would be way better. But tough to have a solar eclipse on a Saturday night. Just, I don't know why. Maybe because it's dark. But so we did that. I've been out doing sets around a lot around the Bay Area here because the World Series of Comedy is coming up next month in Las Vegas, and I will be out there again. If you've been listening to the show for the last couple of years, you know World Series is an interesting time of year for me because I've been to all of them. This I think is my 8th one or something ridiculous like that. And anyway, so I'm working out my set here around the Bay Area. So if you're in the Bay Area, pop into a local comedy show sometime in the next couple of weeks. Chances are you'll see me banging out my 8 minutes that I'm working on for the festival. So that'll be good. So I've been doing that. There are tour dates coming up. Tuesday, 8/21, August 21st. If you're listening to it the day this comes out, I'll be at the Starline Social Club in Oakland, California. Wednesday, August 23rd, I'll be headlining full-length show, Wind River Casino in Redding, California. That's a full, I'm doing a whole hour, that one, so that'll be good. And then Thursday, August the 31st, I'll be at the Blue Lagoon in Santa Cruz, California, probably picking up a few more sets along the way in there. You can always, of course, get the tour dates at underthecrossbones.com and just click on the tour dates button, and you'll find out when I'm coming to you. I got a whole bunch of national dates coming up, so that'll be fun. The other thing we did this weekend was we bought a big, stupid TV. And this was, we bought a 65-inch 4K ridiculous big stupid TV, and I'm not a huge TV watcher. I watch I watch comedy specials on Netflix, and I watch Preacher, and that's about it. There's not a lot that I don't have time. I'm busy. I got things happening. But my girlfriend wanted the big stupid TV, and I, as the man of the house, as the all-controlling man of the house, absolutely gave in to her whims. And boy, was that thing expensive. We don't even have it on the wall yet. Right now, it's sitting on our kitchen table. And we're trying to decide whether we're going to put it where we had the smaller TV, which it'll fit there on its stand thing, or if we're going to mount it above the fireplace, because nobody mounts animal heads above their fireplace anymore. Now we mount TVs because we don't go outside anymore. And it's better. We don't want to mount animal heads. I like animals, but the TV, we mount the TV, and then we watch other people go out and do things on that TV. That's what we mount above the fireplace. And tricky thing, they get you on the installation for that because they go, oh, mount it over a fireplace. Well, the wall is thinner or something. They give you some ridiculous reason there, and they go, oh, it'll cost you $100 to mount it above the fireplace. So we're trying to decide. We have not decided yet. I'm trying to convince her that she will not like it above the fireplace, and that she will strain her neck watching TV above the fireplace, and hoping that we can just put it where the other one was to save $300. Will it work? Will it work? We'll find out next week. That's our cliffhanger for this week. Will we end up paying to mount the TV over the fireplace? You guys don't care. I know you don't care. It's all right. If you're enjoying the show, we're going to get into this interview here in a second. It's really, really fun. If you're enjoying the show, be sure to join us over on Facebook, facebook.com/underthecrossbones. On Twitter, we're at undercrossbones, no the. And, of course, you can get all the show notes for this show at underthecrossbones.com/105. If you'd like to help support the show, that would be awesome. Go to underthecrossbones.com/support. There's a PayPal box there. Drop anything you want in the PayPal box. It's like a donation bucket, and you can put whatever you want in there. If you don't want to donate anything, that's cool, too. Tell a friend. Or you can click the Amazon banner. There's a nice little Amazon banner on there. And you go over to Amazon, you buy yourself something nice, maybe a giant, big, stupid TV that you're going to put on your wall above your fireplace. You buy yourself a big, stupid TV on Amazon, and Amazon kicks me back a few shekels. Actually, that would probably be a pretty good payday. Do that. Go buy Amazon. Go buy Amazon and get yourself a giant, big, stupid TV. But make sure to click my banner first, because that would be very helpful. The box is bigger than my sofa. It's ridiculous. If you want to be a sponsor of this show, go to underthecrossbones.com/support, and you can contact me from there. We'll get you. It's cheap. It's easy to be a sponsor of the show. Okay, I'm going to go. I'm going to figure out, while you're listening to the interview, I'm going to figure out what to do with the giant, big, stupid TV box that is now sitting in my living room. So here it is. This is my interview with screenwriter David Magee. We're talking Finding Neverland, Life of Pi, lots of other stuff. Here we go. Yay! You're a screenwriter, and we're going to talk a lot today about Finding Neverland, and because Captain Hook is one of the greatest pirate characters in literature and theater. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about a whole bunch of other stuff that you've worked on, too. So that'll be fun. But Finding Neverland was your first screenplay then, yeah?
Yes, that's right. I started as an actor in New York City and regional theater, made no money, had a blast. Long story, very short. I had been abridging novels for audiobooks to make my living, and that made me think maybe I could write as well. And so I wrote a two-person play, which I put on in a little theater in 42nd Street called the 42nd Street Workshop. And a woman who was in that workshop said, hey, let's do this at another theater out in the Hamptons. So we did. And then I asked her, what are you going to work on next? And she said, well, there's another guy in the workshop, a guy named Alan Nee, who wrote a play called The Man Who Was Peter Pan, which is lovely, but it's not a film, and he's not quite figured out how to make it a film. And I said, what's it about? And he said, She said, it's about the man who wrote Peter Pan and the boys who were the inspirations for the Lost Boys. And I said, well, I can write that. I probably would have said that if she had said it was about sanitation workers. I wanted to get a chance to write a film. Neither of us had ever done one before, but I agreed to write the script for $1. Huh. And by coincidence, a little blurb about the play had appeared in, I don't know, Variety or The Hollywood Reporter or something, and someone at Miramax had seen it. And so about a week later, they called and said, we're interested in finding out about this. And the woman, Nellie Bellflower, said, well, I sold the rights to writing it to David Magee for $1. So they said, okay, well, show us what he gets when he's done. Show us what he's written when he's finished, and that's how I became a screenwriter. So it worked out really well for me. I'd never been to England before. I'm not British, but I got to write a film that turned out really well in the end, obviously.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And so it was completely on spec. There was nobody big attached to it when you got your hands on it. It was just this little play happening that needed somebody else to write a screenplay on it.
Exactly. And it was very different. The play ended up being very different from the film. The play was really about more of James Barrie's whole life. In the first act, it was the boys, and in the second act, they had grown up and moved on, and he was coming to terms with the fact that he was kind of the boy who didn't want to grow up, but the boys had. But that would have meant, if we did it as a film, that you would have had to write the kids as kids, and then you would have had different actors playing them at different ages and that sort of thing. And we just went, why don't we just concentrate on the period where he wrote Peter Pan? So we condensed all of that action. So that was the result.
Had you had any, what was your experience with the Peter Pan story previous to that?
Well, I had been an actor for years, and so I had been in auditions for the original play on both sides of the table, auditioning for parts. I don't think I ever was in it, but definitely in the casting room, and I don't remember in what capacity. I know I saw 100 versions of it. And so I was very familiar with the play. I just didn't know that I was ever going to have another thing to do with it, quite honestly. I had no intention of getting involved with it. Years later, after I wrote Neverland, I actually became quite good friends with Jim Hart, who wrote Hook. We've had many conversations about the fact that, it is that sense of being able to be a kid and not growing up that is so attracted to people who originally entered the theater, to playing at games and living life that way. But of course, it was not on my mind when I was writing the play. In fact, just the opposite. I was very aware that I was, 30 years old. My father was near the end of his life. My first son was about to be born, and I needed to get a serious job. I had to grow up. So what was interesting to me about the original play is not wanting to grow up, and yet just like James Barrie in the film, I was facing the fact that, you do have to move on. Life does move on, and you do have to grow up. So that became kind of the main theme of the film.
Interesting. Yeah, and you almost sort of parallel the movie Hook, which you were talking about, which is the opposite story, essentially, where he's already grown up and has to learn to be a kid again. Yeah, that was always one of my favorite movies. I love that.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. He's a great guy.
And with Dustin Hoffman in both of them, strangely.
Yes, by wild coincidence. And that was actually a surprise to me. We're jumping forward in the story, but that's okay. I had originally written the part of Froman, the producer, as a very small part. And it's not a large part in the film, but I had not intended to have a star in that role. I didn't think I would felt like I was going to be lucky if I could get anyone to do any of the roles, So that was just a bit part, and I was happy with it. And then one of the producers called me. We were on our way close to finishing our casting, and he said that Dustin Hoffman's agent had just called and said, "Hey, is there anything for Dustin? He's just itching to do something right now." And my friend said, "Well, no, I don't really have anything. I mean, I have this small role, but he wouldn't want it." And the agent called back like half an hour later and said, "Well, what if he does?" And I think he just really wanted to do something, and it was in London, and he has a place in Hyde Park, and it sounded interesting, and so he suddenly said, "Yeah, I'll do it." And to me, that was amazing. So then we revisited the character, and I did my best to make it, much more suitable to someone of that, stature. And interestingly enough, the musical that's now on Broadway, which I had nothing to do with really, except for seeing it a couple of times, that character is even larger. That character is now like the second lead in the show.
Right.
So, but things change and evolve as time goes on.
Certainly, yeah. Now, in the original, because in the film, the character of Captain Hook is played by Dustin Hoffman as well, and there's the traditionally in the play, the same character, or the same actor always played Captain Hook and Mr.
That's
Darling.
right.
And were you looking for that kind of that same kind of match, even though there's no Mr. Darling in Finding Neverland?
What's interesting in Finding Neverland was originally I had the actor who originally played Captain Hook was Gerald du Maurier, and his sister was Sylvia Llewellyn-Davies, the woman that Kate Winslet played in the film.
Okay,
so. In the film, originally, I was writing it that, Sylvia knew James, and then James also happened to know this actor who was her brother, and it became a thing that her brother was actually in the play as well. But the longer we worked on it, the more we realized that was really beside the point. That wasn't the story we were telling, and it actually kind of got more confusing because, who knew who first, and why isn't he in more scenes if he's her brother? And why isn't he there when she's dying? And so all of those things just complicated things. But in actual fact, her brother was quite an accomplished actor and the father of Daphne du Maurier, who wrote Rebecca and a bunch of other novels. And so it was quite a talented family.
Interesting. And I know in the Broadway version, the Captain Hook character has a much larger part. And I actually just spoke with John Davidson recently, who's playing Captain Hook in the touring company right now.
Oh, great.
And he said that it's actually a much larger part. Were you, because Captain Hook is such a prominent part of that story, were you ever looking for ways to kind of fit him in more that didn't fit in, that you tried and didn't work?
That was essentially, yes. I mean, we were, the film and the play do a lot of parallels between the action in the play and what's going on in James Barrie's life. And originally, when I was playing with the Gerald, the brother, I was trying to find ways to make his role much more prominent in the film. What I got most interested in was the fact that Captain Hook, his biggest fear in life is being chased by the ticking crocodile, which is, I mean, I'd never thought about it until I actually was working on this, which is time. The ticking crocodile is time eats everything essentially, and he's one of the grown-ups in the thing in the Peter Pan's world, who has already lost a hand to time and is afraid that it's coming back to devour him, and he hates the boy who won't grow up because he's feeling his mortality more or less, Right. And so the more I thought about that, the more I didn't want to make Captain Hook the character a person in real life. The more I wanted him to just remain that James Barrie's fears, essentially, off stage. So in the musical, the main themes are a little bit different. and that character becomes much more prominent and is the voice of that fear, essentially. You know, and that's great. It's a musical, and you can do things in a much more theatrical way. What we were trying to do with the play was keep it with the film, was keep it very grounded, except for those moments when we went into James's head and he was having flashes of ideas of how he could bring that world to life. And he doesn't completely do that until we get to the end, and Kate Winslet, who said, "I hope you can take me to Neverland someday," is dying, and he brings the play to her, and she gets to see Neverland, which is kind of like an idea of some measure of kind of overcoming that moment of death.
Right.
It's a different story in the hands of the musical, and that's not to favor one or the other or anything. The longer they work on it, the more it becomes its own story.
Certainly.
And I would have them speak more to what that was about as opposed to the film.
Absolutely. Yeah. Everything will go through changes just in the act of working on it, on something like that. So
absolutely. Yeah.
Now, when Miramax got their sort of ears around this and they said, well, we want to see what he's doing once the script is written, what did that process look like going from that point to actually getting it made? Were there tons of revisions? How did that process go?
There were some revisions, but really, I mean, first they bought the script and they asked for some revisions, most of which were, you can spend more money. And I know that sounds crazy, but I was writing a script for $1 and I didn't know that we'd have $2 to make it. So when I first wrote it, I kept it as small and contained as I could.
Sure.
And I avoided any kind of big expensive sets and wild flights of fancy and that sort of thing. And so the first note I got was, go ahead, do it. Make it as big as you want. We'll pull back, but go ahead and go for it,
Nice.
And so that was, and there were other, it's been so long, I couldn't even tell you what the changes were. But, they gave me notes on the script as a whole, and I wrote another draft of it, and I made things bigger. And then they went off to find a director, and couple of years passed, which is kind of astounding, when I just sold a movie, and then 2 years passed because they were looking for the right director, and Harvey kept turning down directors whose names I knew, and I would think, why would you I'd have anyone direct it, please, I would be grateful for anyone to direct this. So there came a point where in my mind, I had, as the fortunate result of this, because I sold a script to Miramax, I had an agent and I was getting more work and I was able to write other scripts. And I kind of, in my mind, said, well, maybe it gets made someday, but maybe it doesn't, and I'm okay. And then it was a couple years, maybe even 2.5 years later, that I happened to be out in LA, and one of the producers called me and said, we have a director. And I said, well, that's fantastic. Who is it? And he said, this guy, Mark Forster. He just directed Monsters Ball. I've got a screening of it in an hour. Let's go see it. And he, like in the screening room. And so I went, and the story was that Harvey that Mark had read the script 2 years earlier, but he was still just coming out of film school, and he loved it, and he tried to get the job, and Harvey didn't even interview him, I don't think. He didn't even talk to him about it, or maybe he said hello, but he didn't take him seriously, so I'd never heard his name before. And then he saw an advanced screening of Monsters Ball, and he met Mark afterwards and said, what do you want to do next? And Mark said, Finding Neverland, and so he said, it's yours. So I went and saw a screening of Monsters Ball, which is a terrific and extremely dark film.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, why did Harvey think this guy who's got this incredible dark, why would this film tell you that that's the right guy to do Neverland? Well, of course, it didn't work that way. It was the other way around. Mark had wanted to do Neverland, and he got a chance to do Monsters Ball, so he did that. But he's a very versatile director, so the moment I met him later that day, he's soft-spoken, kind, very polite fellow who he's anything but this dark brooding sort.
Right.
And I very quickly realized that he was going to do a great job with it. But by the time we started filming, we were 3.5 years into the process or so. And so it became a very long process, which is kind of the norm I've realized in making films.
Certainly, yeah. And for anybody to get their first screenplay produced at all is a miracle, usually. So
absolutely, yeah. To even to get a script sold is a miracle. So I was doing just great, but a lot of my friends were convinced that I was either exaggerating or wasn't really a screenwriter, was doing other stuff. It was kind of a, no, really, I did sell the script. I swear to you, I sold the script kind of thing, It
turns into the girlfriend who goes to another high school.
Exactly, yeah. So no, really, yeah, she exists. Yeah, so, it was 6.5 years from the time I started writing until the film came out. So
wow. At what point did Johnny Depp become involved in the project?
Shortly after Mark came on board, and they started casting about for who would play the leads, because that was very important. I did another draft with Mark and the producers, and as part of that, we didn't know. I mean, originally I had written Barrie more closer to the age of 50. Because that was closer to what he was when he first met that family. But in Hollywood terms, that's an older leading man, not the one that's going to bring as many people to the box office. So we started talking about who would be in that age group, the slightly younger age group. Of course, Depp's in that age group now, but but back then, he was maybe early 30s,
Yeah.
And so that was a much more appropriate choice for it. And I wasn't present, but Mark and one of the producers went out. He sent it to him and went out to dinner with him, and he liked the script, and he thought it was a nice thing to be doing he had a young daughter at the time who's not so young anymore, and so he was interested in doing it. And so it was, in a sense, that easy once we actually had a director on board and a script and all of that. He had, since we're talking pirates, it's interesting that this was. That Neverland was filmed just before Pirates of the Caribbean was filmed.
Right.
But then there was a rights issue with some of the dialogue from the original play and a movie version of Peter Pan that was coming out. And so we weren't allowed to come out for another year. And in the interim, they started filming. He started filming Pirates of the Caribbean right after he filmed us. And it came out before we did.
Oh, interesting.
So it gave us a tremendous boost at the box office because, Johnny Depp was always a respected actor, but he had not gone into the stratosphere with the Pirates franchise yet.
Right.
And this was essentially the first film after the first Pirates movie came out.
Right. Oh, that would give you a huge bump.
Yeah, it helped.
And you probably thought when there was a rights issue, a legal issue, you're like, oh no, this is going to delay everything. And then sometimes those things turn out to be great.
Oh, I was amazed because it was just like they had told me to go ahead and make the sets bigger, and spend more money. They told me, use more of the original play. Don't be afraid. We'll get the rights. No problem. And the play is technically, even at the time, was out of copyright.
Right.
But in a very unusual exception to the rule, James Barrie donated all of the profits to Peter Pan to an orphanage in London, the Great Ormond Street Hospital. And the British government was so taken with the gesture that they extended the rights to Peter Pan and that charity kind of on in forever, Yeah. And so we couldn't play anything in London if we wanted to do it, and that's a problem. So someone else bought the rights to make the live action Peter Pan without anyone checking to see if we could get the rights. We just assumed we were fine.
Oh gosh.
And we had already filmed. And it was suddenly, hey Dave, funny situation here. We've already filmed all those scenes and they're important part of the movie, but we can't use them. So
Oh my gosh.
we're just going to have to wait until the other thing comes out at Christmas, and then we'll come out the following year. So,
And
but it turned out to be fantastic. Yeah, because then Pirates of the Caribbean hit that summer, and we were heroes. I mean, we were like, we got Johnny Depp,
Yeah.
So it worked out really well.
That's amazing. Now, when you were writing the screenplay, did you go back to any of the source material that Alan Nee may have been looking at before writing the play?
Absolutely. I went back to, I don't know which source material specifically he used. I read his play. In the end, I think there are only 3 or 4 lines from the play that are in the movie, but that's nothing against the play. It's a different story.
Sure.
They fly a kite in both the play on stage and in the movie. And he says to the boy, "I'd be honored if you would give me your name I'm writing a new play, and I'd be honored if I could use your name, Peter." And then there's not much else, but as soon as because I didn't know anything about James Barrie, I went off and read 3 biographies as best I could, kind of devoured as much as I could about him and read research stuff about him along the way. And, some of it was of not much use. I was getting repetitive stuff, but it's the little detail that ends up kind of making a scene. There's one scene where the boys have found out their mom is sick, and they're waiting for the doctor to come down from upstairs, and they're all sitting pensively in the living room. And James tries to think of a way to entertain them. And I remembered that there was a mention in this huge 600-page bio of James Barrie that he had a trick where he could put a stamp on a coin and flip it onto the ceiling and get it to stick. And so I put that in the movie. And, so that whole bio paid off just for that one moment because, suddenly you have a great little funny scene with these kids flipping coins in the air, and it just changes the whole tone of the scene.
Yeah.
So
I particularly enjoyed that scene. I remember it lent such a lightness to it, to what otherwise was a very, very dark part of that movie. I remember that scene specifically. Do you remember which of the biographies of Barrie that you enjoyed the most, found the most truthful, or found the most useful?
Wow, I wish I had looked at my bookcase downstairs
That's okay.
before you asked me that question. Offhand, I can't remember. I know that there was I can't remember the names, unfortunately. There was one about Barrie and the Lost Boys by a fellow whose name escapes me, who did a PBS television version of the story. But in that, it was darker, and it kind of insinuated that there was a creepy edge to Barrie's fascination with those boys. And
right, yeah.
I wasn't comfortable with that for the film. I didn't care about that, making that movie, frankly. But I think it's interesting that Barrie himself may have essentially been someone who literally didn't grow up. There is a condition where you don't go through your adolescence, your puberty, and you are uninterested in sexuality, and it's actually a predominant thing in the character of Peter Pan. He doesn't know what a kiss is.
Sure.
So when she gives him an acorn, he thinks that's a kiss. He's not interested in Tinkerbell, who's around him all the time, who really represented his wife. And he was more interested in not growing up and being a boy forever. And all of that kind of lends itself to a very different interpretation.
Certainly.
And so, I don't know. I don't know either way. But that was not of interest to me in writing it to begin with, so it didn't become part of things. None of the other bios focused on that I can recall. Some of them were written at the turn of the century. And, their titles were about, James Barrie, the man and his art, that sort of thing. I can't remember the exact titles, though.
Huh, interesting. Yeah, and the reason I ask is because I recently thought I should go down this James Barrie rabbit hole and find out more about the man, because I've always been a fan of the story itself. And then as soon I did a Google search, and 10 minutes later I was like, I don't know who to believe. I don't know what's going on. I was like, I need to wait and find out some better information before I go down this hole.
Well, and I didn't know who to believe either. And honestly, when I started, I was reading the old bios, and the old bios wouldn't even think of suggesting such a thing.
Sure.
And then there's the newer one, and he may be right, I don't know, who suggested that was the case. And by the time I had gotten to that, I was, writing in the evenings and trying to do my own version of this thing. And honestly, I mean, the beginning of our film, Finding Neverland, we splash on the screen, this is based on, real events. Yeah. But it's scenes with people flying through the air and all sorts of things. It's meant to be a fantasy, and we compressed time, and we even eliminated one of the boys because there was an extra boy who would have been a baby at the time of the action of the film, and we didn't want Kate Winslet. Well, Kate didn't want Kate Winslet carrying around a baby the whole film, like a football. So, we took liberties as it was, and this was essentially, for me, Finding Neverland was the story about what does it mean to grow up if you are a 30-year-old-ish man who's suddenly having to deal with, death around you and kids, and it was more like what I was going through and how I related that to that story. So at a certain point, I didn't care. At a certain point, I went, this is what I wanted to write,
I think any of us in the entertainment business, because I'm a performer as well, we all deal with that I don't want to kind of grow up thing, because I don't have kids, and there's a good reason for it, because I get to be the kid in the house that way.
Exactly, yeah.
And so I think that's why that story resonates with performers so much, is because we all have to face down that specific aspect of life, probably much later than normal people do.
I think so. I think, even thinking, and this is true in other professions as well, but even coming to the conclusion that you can make a living doing something as frivolous as acting, and devoting your life to it, takes a certain kind of personality that says, I don't have to deal with all those grown-up things that everyone else does. Although I will say, I'm very much a grown-up. I'm not. There's a part of me that gets to be a kid when I go and work on my stuff.
Sure.
But I do, I get my bills paid on time and all of that. Right. And I don't have that sensibility that just says, I never have to deal with anything in life, which was part of the conversation in my head in that film, because you can't just kind of run away. Oh, well, she's dying. Well, I don't need to be around that. I'll go do something else, So really, in the course of the film, James Barrie does take responsibility for those kids and does grow up.
It's interesting. I really, really enjoyed the film, because I just watched it again a couple weeks ago before I talked with John Davidson to refresh myself on the story. So it's all fairly fresh in my head. Yeah, also fresh in my head, because I just watched it last night, is Life of Pi. So let's talk about a little bit about that. Yeah,
no pirates,
because no pirates. That's okay.
Lots of sea.
Yes. Oh, lots of water. Yeah. Lots and lots of water.
Yeah.
And so, because I watched an interview you did with Tavis Smiley where you said you had read the book and really didn't think it was a movie, and then when Ang Lee became attached to the idea and you were called up to do it, that it all of a sudden became a movie that was possible in your head, which I think is interesting. But your second before we do that, your second project was Miss Pettigrew Lives for a Day. How did that one come to you?
That one was Nellie Bellflower, who was the producer on Neverland, actually found a book. Another producer found the book and showed it to her, and she thought it would be great for me, and she brought it to me. And I was fortunate enough to, out of the gate, I was getting assignment work to write scripts, so I was nice and busy. And she brought it to me, and I flipped through it, and it had little line drawings from the 1930s, and I thought, oh no, I don't want to do another period. I don't want to get typed as a guy who writes period British films, So I didn't even look at it for ages, because I just thought, I'm from Flint, Michigan. I hadn't gone to London before I wrote the first one, and I don't want to have everyone thinking I'm pretending to be British. Right. So I avoided it for a long time. Finally, I got around. I picked it up off of the nightstand, and it was surprisingly funny and surprisingly contemporary in feel. The film itself ended up being a little softer edge than the book, which had, Delicia LaFosse, Amy Adams' character, running around basically sleeping with everyone, mainly gangsters, and the gangsters selling cocaine and just kind of crazy, edgy stuff. And it was very funny to me that this very staid woman would find herself being tossed into this environment and mistaken for one of them. And so I agreed to write it. And the woman who originally wrote the book, called Winifred Watson was her name, was, I think, 97 when I kind of agreed to do it. And then we took it into focus. Unfortunately, she passed away before I was ever able to meet her. But we took it to Focus Universal, and they bought it. And then a few months later, we got a call from Focus saying, guess what? Winifred Watson sold the rights to us twice before, which I thought was amazing. She sold it to them before the war, before World War II. And then the records were lost. They ended up not doing it because everything ended up being about the war and everything, all the films. Then they lost the records, and after the war, they asked her if they could buy it, and they bought it outright each time. They asked her if they could buy it, and she said sure, and so she sold it to them again, and then 50 years passes, and or 60 years, whatever it is, and we came. The producer who Nellie spoke with asked her if he could get the rights, and she said sure, and so Focus was ready to. Was paying up again, and then they looked through the chain of title and went, wait a minute, we already own this twice.
That's hilarious.
Which I thought was genius. I actually love that.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, I'm sorry I never got to meet her for that. So that was
That's
really
so funny.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
So now when it comes to Life of Pi, it was I have not read the book. I've seen the movie. Now I have to read the book. I always like to see the movie first, so I don't get
That's great.
The book was better. Yeah. And so when you came into that is a notoriously difficult book to write a script from, because apparently a lot of it is in the characters' heads. It's a lot of theory and abstract concepts and things like that are difficult to put on the screen. But after looking at your body of work on your IMDb page, I thought what you seem to gravitate towards is the mundane crashing into the fantastic, and both of them are changed based on that interaction. I don't know if that sounds accurate to you.
No, that's exactly what it is. It was not intentional, but I've discovered over the years that that's exactly what I gravitate toward. I've always put it in another way where it's, people using stories and fantasy to get through the difficulties of their lives.
Okay.
So it's grounded in a reality, but then it's finding a way through the troubles of your life by stepping outside of that reality in some way, whether through stories, through fantasy, through the theater, becoming another person, or Mary Poppins arriving. It's all of that has just kept cropping up. Now, that doesn't mean I won't write something that doesn't have to do with that, but that's sort of what attracted me to storytelling to begin with. Not that I had any horrible things that I had to overcome in my life, but theater and film for me was a way to understand the world and to kind of take lessons for how to navigate, through it.
Yeah.
And so I look at stories themselves as having that power. And that was exactly what Life of Pi was about. It was about, a boy who needed stories quite literally to get through the greatest ordeal anyone can imagine.
Do you think in that story that he was getting through it because of religion, or getting through it because he had a story and it might not have mattered what the story was?
Whoa, that's an interesting question. I think it mattered to him that it was religion. My theory in writing the film, my thesis was we all have different stories that get us through. And it can be religion, it can be science, it can be, because no matter what it is, there comes a point where your story is at its limits. Even if it's the most advanced science in the world, it
Sure.
can't describe, why certain things happen in this world, or why we feel certain things, or it can't describe the taste of something, even if it can tell you the chemical components of it.
Mm-hmm.
You are doing your best to piece together a picture of the world based on, and I am a strong, as an aside, I'm a strong believer in science and follower of that. I'm not saying that stories serve the exact same purpose as science, or that you don't have to believe the science. But I do believe that people should be open to other people's way of coping with life or understanding what they use in life. I've met people who need to understand astrology, which I don't happen to believe in, but I have respect for their need, if not necessarily the practice, because I can't judge what someone has gone through, or how that particular story helps them. So I wanted the Life of Pi to not come down on which story was right, which religion was right, whether religion is the right course, or believing in the absolute truth is the right course, because for different people there are different answers. For Pi, though, there was absolutely, it was religion that got him through, and it was a tiger. And when other people said to him, was the tiger even real? That at a certain point is like, does it matter? It was
right.
for me, and it's what got me through. So yeah, there was a tiger.
Interesting. When you went into adapting that book into a film, which had been done 100+ times before to no great avail, what did your process look like? I mean, did you just bring out your copy of Save the Cat and go for it, or did you? how did you jump into it?
No, I was working with Ang from day one, and so basically, I got a call from my agent. He asked if I'd be interested in working with Ang. I said, sure, absolutely. And I did have reservations about the book because I had read it and I knew how difficult it was. But I sort of figured, if I can't do this with Ang, who's going to blame me? We both, like if you fail with one of the great directors, and it's like, no, you got to work with him, And so I met with him the next night and we started a conversation that night about what we thought the book was about and what mattered to us. And I said, for me, the most important thing was storytelling, and essentially what I just said. And he said that sounded like he agreed with that. And we exchanged some thoughts. And I went home and typed up some notes based on that and sent them to him. I don't know, maybe 7 or 8 pages, 10 pages. And then we would meet every week. I'd come into the city. He'd read the pages I sent. He'd write up some thoughts on the pages. I live out in New Jersey. He lives in Manhattan, just north of Chinatown area. And so we would go to an Asian lunch once a week and talk for a long time. Then we go back to his loft and we'd talk some more, and I'd take more notes, and then I went away. And we continued this for a couple months. The luxury of working with someone like Ang Lee is the studio will hire you and not ask you how you're doing. They'll just leave you alone because they whatever he wants, whatever he needs. If he says he wants David and he likes David and it's going fine, they're not going to bother you. So we worked for quite a while, and we also had the luxury of being able to ask to go to India to all the locations and see where all of this took place. And also along the way, my nephew told me about a guy named Stephen Callahan who had written a book about being shipwrecked at sea in a 5-foot circular inflatable raft for 69 days.
Oh, wow.
And he had been in a very long story short, he had been in a sailing race in France, and he was coming back to America. And in the middle of the night, apparently a whale, he's thinking a whale tried to surface, hit the underside of his boat. The boat sank within minutes. He managed to grab one bag of supplies and his raft and inflate it. He was just wearing a T-shirt. He had, because he'd been sleeping. And that's all he had. And it was about his ordeal. And so we said, we got to talk to this guy about what is that like? What did you learn?
Yeah.
What did you do? What did you not do? And he became our survival consultant on the film, ultimately. But we went up to Maine and met with him, and he took us out on a boat. And Ang had the momentarily brilliant idea of saying, let's have him take us out in the water and abandon us. And I said, I said, great. And then I said to Stephen quietly, don't do that to us. And he said, no, I won't. I'm not going to do that. But he said, what I will do is he went out in the boat with us, and he just took down the sail in rough water. And it was hideous. It was like being in a washing machine.
Sure.
And, I couldn't believe you would be able to handle that for a day, much less 69 days, in a raft. So it was pretty astounding.
That's insane. I saw his name in the credits, but I had no idea. I thought, a survival consultant. I thought, a Bear Grylls type, but I didn't think it was actually somebody who had actually gone through an experience like that. That's amazing.
I'm fairly sure that was one of the many books that Jan Martel read along the way when he was researching Pi. Just not that he took anything specific and used it, but it was one of the few books out there that really said, yes, I've been through this and this is what it's like. It's called Adrift, and it's kind of an amazing read, and fast read too, if you're into that kind of survival story thing. So that became part of, the challenge was finding the actions that you'd have to do to survive, and what would you do to build your sense of confidence and seamanship if you'd been thrown into a raft and you'd never sailed before, and how do you survive? And then also we had obviously a tiger consultant,
right,
and a ship consultant, and all sorts of things who helped us, get the details right. Because when you're telling something as fantastic as that on such a scale, half your audience is an expert in something. And the more you make little mistakes with things, the more you lose one audience member at a time. So you want to keep the real details as grounded as possible. And then when you take the flights of fancy, they understand that you've earned it.
Sure, yeah. And I thought all that was fantastic. What has your experience been like not being in Los Angeles as a screenwriter?
Well, it's been great. I consider myself very lucky. The reason I'm not in Los Angeles was not because I didn't, if it had happened at a different time in my life, I might very well have moved out there. But I was 30 years old when I started writing Pi, and I was 29 and a half, whatever. And I was 36 when it came out. And so by that point, when the movie came out, I had 2 kids at that point, and we had a backyard, and we had a neighborhood and family, and my son was in already starting to make friends in school, and so it didn't seem fair to uproot the family until we knew I had to.
Sure.
So it was more kind of like you just keep asking yourself, do you need to move? Do you need to move? And what I realized very quickly is once you've got the job, for the 3 months or whatever that you're writing on your own, no one wants to see you. No one needs to see you, So I could do all the writing I wanted. There are also directors, I've worked with Rob Marshall and Ang, who live in New York, and met with several others. And New York is a real hub, so I can meet with people anytime in New York. And I've made it part of my job to say, well, if anyone needs me, I'll go out to L.A. And so I take 3 or 4 trips a year out there. But in trade-off for that, I don't live in a world with only people or primarily people who are associated with the entertainment industry.
Right.
It's at least something unique in my neighborhood to do what I do, and I can let that go at the end of the day.
Yeah. Have you found it a hindrance in any way?
No, I don't think so. If
That's good.
I was starting today, if I wanted to be a screenwriter and I was starting today, I would absolutely move out to LA, or I would move to New York and try to be a playwright first.
Okay.
You have to have a place to start. But you know, once you get that break, if you are fortunate enough to get the break, and I think everyone gets a shot at something at some point. Now, they may not be ready for it, but if you hang around the right places long enough, someone will say, well, what can you do? Show me. And if you're ready for it, you can get your shot. And then it's just a question of you know, do you still want to be in LA after that? A lot of screenwriters move out of LA once they've become successful, move down to Austin or to New York or wherever and work where they want. But getting started, you can't, I mean, unless you're the most talented playwright ever, you're not likely to get started writing plays in Nebraska where there's no, you know, and forgive me if now I'm speaking to a larger audience. If someone's in Nebraska, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with Nebraskan theater. It's just, it's not connected to the world where that's going to get put on a larger scale.
Right.
And, or not likely to. And so it's much easier to circulate in a world where plays are put on all the time, or films are made all the time, or television is shot all the time. And it makes it more likely. But these days, film and television are shot all over the place. If you want to get a job in the film industry, you can just as easily go up to Vancouver,
right,
or down to North Carolina and work as a production assistant, and then work your way up, and then maybe move somewhere, as it is to start in LA, where traditionally everyone had to go first.
Right. Makes sense. So let's talk about a little bit about your upcoming projects. You've got The Return of Mary Poppins, Mary Poppins Returns, which is a dangerous project, I imagine, to take on for anybody that might be a fan of the story.
Well, yes, although, again, I might just talk myself into these things, but I said to myself when I got the chance, I get to work with Rob Marshall. Sure, of course, I'd love to. And the guys who did the music for Hairspray. And I very quickly thought to myself, if it doesn't work, I'm the last person to get blamed, because everyone remembers the music from Mary Poppins, and now the pressure's on the music. Everyone remembers Julie Andrews, and so Emily Blunt has to do a fantastic job, and everyone is looking at the director. Not everyone thinks about, and it's a very good script, but not everyone thinks about the script for Mary Poppins. That's the thing that made that movie, you know?
Right.
So it doesn't mean that I wouldn't be responsible. It means that the focus, if it doesn't work, isn't on me in the same way it's on Emily, you know? Or it's on Mark Shaman and Scott Whitman, who composed and did the lyrics. So I didn't really hesitate. And if anything, my experience with Pi was I took on something that was really hard and it worked out. And it actually gave me gave me more confidence in just giving something a shot. But it also worked out really well, where suddenly the screenwriter did get a little more focused, because it was something considered, you know, really challenging. And I don't think I would have been blamed if it didn't come off, you know?
Right.
So,
yeah.
So that was the logic. And then it turned out to be an amazing process, very similar to what I did with Pi. We started meeting, 5 of us started meeting. Rob Marshall, the director, John DeLuca, one of the producers, Mark Shaman, the composer, Scott Whitman, the lyricist, and me. And we all read there are, I think, 7 or 8, I always forget, Mary Poppins books.
Yeah.
All of which are very similar in structure. They're very episodic. Each chapter begins with them, you know, going into the market or going off to the park, and then ending up on some fantastical adventure. And at the end of the adventure, Mary Poppins goes, I don't know what you're talking about. That didn't happen.
Right.
And that just happens chapter after chapter. And even with the later books, she kind of says, these scenes happen somewhere in the midst of the other books. They happen, you know, these are not even beginning, middle, and end stories. I'm not even trying. I'm just writing chapters. So the original movie was making a story out of that that was not necessarily there.
Right.
So I had a freedom too in in that I could read those books. We could read those books together. And I essentially said to them early on, guys, what are your favorite adventures? Because let's build our story with those adventures in mind.
Sure.
And not necessarily worry about what they mean. Just grab them.
Yeah.
And so we all picked our favorite scenes and our favorite lines and our favorite moments. And then we started talking about, well, why would we want to do another? I mean, why would Mary Poppins want to come back? What's wrong with, has he gone like, I've realized the meaning of life, but, I kind of forgot. That didn't feel right. And, we just kind of cast about for why the heck, what went wrong?
Yeah.
And then one day I don't remember where it started, but we started talking about the kids growing older and the fact that it was, the depression hits and bad things happen in their lives and they grew up, so they forget.
Okay.
And so Mary Poppins has to come back for Jane and Michael, the kids, now that they've grown up and they've lost some of that magic, and for Michael's kids.
Huh.
And that ends up being the starting point for what we wrote.
Nice. That sounds like it'll be great. And I suppose the most important question that I would be remiss not to ask, does Dick Van Dyke make a cameo?
He does. Yes, he does. And it's public knowledge, so I can say that. Yeah. I mean, for a while we were keeping that under wraps, but then it got out and then he said, yes, I'm in it. And so, yeah, he's in it. I can't say anything about what his part is, but I'm very happy that he's part of it. It's amazing.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
Yeah.
I once waited 4 hours at a Disney expo to see him sing and dance. And I thought only in this world would people wait 4 hours to see Dick Van Dyke sing and dance.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, but I'm sure it was worth it. It's fantastic.
It totally was.
92 now, I think. 92,
yeah.
3. Amazing.
Yeah, he's amazing. So then they've also announced that you're working on the new Narnia film, which you're just hitting all the childhood favorites. That's so great.
I'm basically reliving my own childhood, which is because I was a big Narnia fan when I was a kid. And and we have it, Mark Gordon producing it with Sony TriStar. And Joe Johnson, who did The Rocketeer and Honey, I Shrunk the Kids and Jurassic Park 3, and I know I'm forgetting some, Jumanji, is directing, and he's a great guy. And we're trying to. I can't say where. I'm not allowed to be the first to announce anything, but we're just we're getting it all in order to be able to say starting now we're shooting from here to here, and we're going to release on this date. So that's all being worked out right now.
Yeah.
But I'm very happy with where the script is right now, and I'm very much looking forward to kind of bringing that series back to life.
Nice.
So it's exciting.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, David, this has been super fun, man. I'm really thankful that you took the time to do this because anytime I hear about,
it's a pleasure.
Yeah, anytime I hear about somebody cool, I'm like, have they done anything piratey that I can talk to them about? So I have a reason to bring them on the show. So this has been really, really fun, and I appreciate your time a whole bunch.
Well, you're more than welcome. It was great talking to you, and I'll have to tune into your Pirates podcast to see who else you've been talking with lately.
For sure, man. Thanks. And there it is, friends. That was my interview with David Magee, talking some Finding Neverland and Life of Pi and Mary Poppins and Narnia, and just so much good stuff the guy is involved in. So make sure to go see his movies if you've not seen them yet. Highly recommend both Finding Neverland and Life of Pi. I haven't seen the Miss Pettigrew one, but I got to check that out too. Life of Pi was one of those where I wasn't quite sure going in. I hadn't read the book, and I was like, I don't know, it looks a little pretentious, but man, super good movie. Super good movie. If you want to hear more about David Magee and find out what he's up to, you can find him on Twitter at realdavidmagee.com. And he spells Magee Magee. So you can find him on Twitter at realdavidmagee on the Twitter. On the Twitter. We got some sponsors today. As a musician myself, I can tell you that one of the hardest things to find is a good teacher for low frequency instruments like your bass and your tuba and all the boom 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 booms. All those are hard teachers to find. My girlfriend was a bass player for years, and she had so much trouble finding good teachers. But if you are in the realm of Houston, Texas, I have got a killer suggestion for you. Jonathan Leon. He is a longtime listener to Under the Crossbones and a fellow pirate, and he's starting a new lesson studio to teach electric and upright bass, tuba, yes, and piano, because we all have to teach piano. And his studio is called Making Great Music. And the dude has chops, man. He's been a musician for 25 years. He's played in the pit for 19 musicals. He studied with Victor Wooten. If you don't know Victor Wooten, go Google that name right now, because you will be mind blown with some bass goodness. And you need some bass in your life. Everybody needs some bass in their life. And tuba, come on, tell me you don't want to learn how to play the tuba. Who doesn't want to learn how to play the tuba? Oh my God, I want a tuba so bad. Adults and kids are welcome. Jonathan, like I said, he's a fellow pirate, so we're keeping it in the family here, man. He's all good. And to get more info and set up some time with Jonathan, go to underthecrossbones.com/makinggreatmusic. Again, that's underthecrossbones.com/makinggreatmusic. We're also sponsored today, of course, by Pirate Radio, the Treasure Coast, WKKC-DB, playing the best music in pirate radio talk. You can listen to Under the Crossbones on both their stations. Just go to pirateradiothetreasurecoast.com. All one word. It's all one word. That's like 7 words. pirateradiothetreasurecoast.com or pirateradiotc.com. And don't forget to download their apps. There's the Pirate Radio Treasure Coast app, which is their music station, and Pirate Radio Talk, which is the talk station. And you can listen to Under the Crossbones on both those stations. So if you're listening from Pirate Radio, welcome. Thank you. It's all good. And I got an ebook for you. Alexander Exquemelin's Pirates of Panama or Buccaneers of America, which is a lovely, lovely piece of writing. Originally published in 1678 by Alexander Exquemelin, who was a doctor, got himself on some pirate ships, and wrote about his experiences. So this is deep in the mush kind of pirate time there. Alexander Exquemelin writing about it's one of the seminal texts of pirate history. So it's one that you should read. And I've got a beautiful ebook version of it for you. All you have to do is go to underthecrossbones.com, click on the free ebook button, and you can grab it there. Or if you're just out and about and all you got your cell phone on you, text the word pirate and your email address to 94253. Text the word pirate and your email address to 94253. Boom. There it is, kids. That is our episode for today. Thank you again for tuning in. Again, if you want to keep up with what David Magee is doing with all the upcoming Mary Poppins and Narnia kind of stuff, you can find him at Real David Magee on Twitter. That's the place to go. And if you have any suggestions, here's what's coming up on the show in the next couple weeks. We got Michael Knowles coming up next week. He is a pirate artist and a former Disney Imagineering design guy. Super fun talk there. We've got Carl Fismer coming up, who is a treasure hunter, underwater, shipwrecky kind of stuff. And then after that, the following week, we're going to talk to Captain Dan of Captain Dan and the Scurvy Crew, the world's only pirate rap group. Yes, man, we got some good stuff coming up. And I got some other interviews on the calendar that are coming up that you're going to dig too. So, and if you have any suggestions for people you think might be cool on the show, send me an email, phil@underthecrossbones.com, or if you want to send me a trip report, whatever you're up to, you're out at the festivals, you're seeing some pirate bands, you want to tell me about it, and I'll put it on the show, you can call me. The number is 408-599-2733. Again, that's 408-599-2733. And we'll do it. That's my voicemail. I won't pick up, so you can just leave me a voicemail there. All right. Like I said, lots of good shows coming up. So tell your friends, leave those reviews on iTunes, and I will see you next week. Bye.